There we go. We are recording. And I will also just share my screen, the slides that we have got coming up for you. So hopefully you can all see the slides. So just to start off, welcome again. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We are going to be talking through the MOPAC VAWG Cost of Living Fund that we have opened for applications last week. We'll be talking you through the criteria of the fund, the priorities, and then a bit about the mechanics and the process for applying. And there'll be a chance for you to ask any questions you might have at the end of that. So you'll see at the bottom of your screens, there should be a Q&A box where you can type any questions into the Q&A. Please do use the Q&A rather than the chat function, as it just makes us a little bit easier for us to keep track on as we go. I'm joined by my colleague at the London Community Foundation, Amari, who's going to be responding to some of the queries as we go along on the Q&A function. And I'm also joined by Leslie Webber from MOPAC, who will also be talking through some of the elements of the fund as we go. So I'll leave Leslie to introduce herself as well when we get to that point. So to start us off with, to introduce the London Community Foundation. So for those of you who don't already know us, we're the London Community Foundation. We specialise in supporting community-based organisations across London, so all London boroughs. We're a donor advised model, which means we work with a variety of different donors. So that might be public sector donors, corporates and individuals as well, to create different types of funds that we manage on behalf of those donors. To give you a bit of an idea, in 2020 to 21, we awarded almost £22.6 million through about 1,300 grants, and about 13.4 million was through the COVID response, to give you a bit of an idea of our scale. We'll move on to handing over to Leslie to introduce MOPAC, for those of you who don't know already.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm Leslie Webber and I work for the Mayor's Office for Police and Crime. I'm a policy and commissioning manager in the Violence Against Women and Girls team in MOPAC. For those of you who don't know, MOPAC is responsible for policing in London, and we do this through the delivery of the Mayor's Policing Crime Plan, which was refreshed last year, which sets out all the priorities that we have to make London a safer city. In the Policing Crime Plan, which was published, like I said, last year, the key priorities which we are focusing on are reducing and preventing violence in London, increasing the trust and confidence of the public in policing, providing better support to victims of crime, and also protecting people from being exploited or harmed. In addition, we also have the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. So that also was refreshed last year. So the new 3-year strategy for London. And that strategy is building on the success of the previous VAWG strategy. So we're now taking the approach that's been used by the Mayor's Violence Reduction Unit, which is about adopting a public health approach to VAWG, and that is everybody's business. And it puts prevention at the centre of everything that we're doing, including a greater focus on education, enhanced partnership working, but not least working with the excellent VAWG sector that we have in London. Again, this strategy sets out 4 priority areas which align with the Police and Crime Plan. So that's around preventing and reducing violence against women and girls, supporting all victims and survivors, holding perpetrators to account, and again, building trust and confidence in the policing and the work that we do from MOPAC. Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the fund now, which you've come to hear about today. So we've essentially launched a £1 million cost of living fund. And this has been in response to what we're hearing across London, across the country, but across London, around services who are tackling violence against women and girls in London, who are reporting about the disproportionate impact the cost of living is having on victims of violence against women and girls. What we're seeing from all of our commission services essentially is an increased need for financial support for basic items such as food and travel, as well as the household bills and accommodation. Very worryingly, of course, is also the increased reporting of women who are reporting that they're feeling even less able to walk away or leave abusive situations, their relationships or households. So because of the financial barriers from the cost of living. So they're essentially being in situations where they're unable to walk away from the harm that they're facing. So as with any funding, of course, we are required to have criteria around it. So the fund is going to be managed by the London Community Foundation, which Sarah will tell you a little bit about once I've finished. But essentially, what it's designed to do is to provide community-based organisations who are tackling VAWG in London to help them respond to the immediate impacts of the cost of living crisis. So our total budget is £1 million, and the grants that we are making available from this funding is between 10,000 and 30,000. And the aim is to fund organisations who have a maximum total income of £500,000. We have to set parameters around what there is available. So we would recommend that if you're putting an application in, it's for no more than 50% of your annual income. It is expected that grants would be spent within 6 months of the award date. And again, as I've said previously, the organisation should be responding to the immediate impacts of the cost of living crisis. So being able to provide the evidence for that in your application. All applications are welcome from organisations based in any London borough. And where posts are part of that application, so if it's using the grant to fund this for staff members, sessional freelance workers, it's essential that those staff members are paid at or above the London living wage, which is currently set at £11.95 per hour. The fund will not give grants directly to individuals. However, we can fund organisations planning to provide cash grants or vouchers to individuals of up to £500 per person. So I've said it before, this fund is about responding to the immediate impacts of the cost of living crisis for victims of VAWG. The core aims of the fund is to address those immediate needs. And the examples that we're seeing and that we know that we would be looking at for eligibility for direct support include ensuring food security, providing essential items for women and girls and their children, emergency hardship funds, I mentioned that previously, up to £500 per individual, supporting access to services. So for example, travel cards or money to go to attend appointments, or accessing technology to be able to access appointments, so such as a smartphone or a computer. Also access to key advice, so financial, legal advice, welfare, housing advice, and also access to counselling and therapeutic support. There's also the option to use funding towards core costs, so as well as funding direct support to women and girls, being able to use part of the grant to support your organisation's core costs, for example, salaries, rent and bills, or additional staffing capacity, but that would be up to a maximum of 50% of the total application amount. So again, within the parameters, preference will be given to specialist violence against women and girls services who are supporting survivors and victims of VAWG who are disproportionately impacted by the cost of living crisis. So that means at least 80% of trustees and staff are from a protected characteristic the organisation is aiming to be working with. So the priority will be given, so when we look at the applications, priority will be given to specialists led by and for violence against women and girls services who are supporting the following groups. So you'll see here that's for Black women and girls from ethnic minority backgrounds, women and girls with disabilities, neurodiverse women and girls, LGBT+, young women and girls, older women, women with no recourse to public funds, male victims. And priority will also be considered for organisations whose work addresses the intersectionality of more than one of those priority groups. So depending on the volume that we receive in for applications, if there is a high volume, then we will need to make put some further parameters around who we prioritise. So we would then start looking at organisations with an annual income of less than £300,000. And looking at those who operate in the areas with higher levels of deprivation. So based on the indices of multiple deprivation data. We would also look at the geographical location of applicants as part of the shortlisting process and look at the spread of availability across London, taking into account that there is equity essentially across all the boroughs in London. And I do believe I'm handing over to Sarah now.
Thank you, Leslie. Yes, I'm just going to cover a little bit of LCF's core eligibility criteria as well. So Leslie's talked us through the fund criteria and the priorities. LCF's core eligibility, I wanted to give you a little run through as well. I think hopefully this should be familiar to those of you that have applied to LCF before, but if you haven't, then I can just explain a little bit further here. So to start with, we look at the eligible legal structures that we're able to fund through this fund and through LCF programmes. The basics that we need is that we do need to have a signed governing document that you would submit with your application, that your activities are charitable and that you could be a registered charity, a company limited by guarantee without shares, a community interest company limited by guarantee, a trust, an unincorporated organisation, or a community benefit society. So those are the legal structures that we're able to fund. In terms of the governance, we ask that you have at least 3 unrelated trustees and directors. So those must be essentially responsible legally for the governance of the organisation. So anything trustees, directors, management committee, whatever's appropriate to your particular structure. And just to note that this would apply to the highest level of governance, so a management committee that sits below a board of trustees or directors, that wouldn't count towards the 3 unrelated trustees or directors. We also ask that you have up-to-date submissions to your regulatory authority, so that might be the Charity Commission or Companies House. And we also look to check that you would have 2 years of net current assets, so not liabilities essentially, within the last 2 years. You would need to have a bank account, and that bank account would be in the name of the organisation that you're applying to with, and having 2 unrelated signatories that's also responsible for that account. We also ask you to update your, upload your safeguarding policy, and also that the policy is reviewed within the last 2 years. So do just make sure that there's a date on the policy that confirms when it was last reviewed and updated. In terms of previous funding for LCF, we ask that that you check whether you have any conditions that might have been set on a previous grant, and if so, that those conditions have been met. And also we would check that if you have monitoring on a previous grant that's overdue, that would also make you ineligible unless you've been in touch with LCF and kind of we're aware of that situation and it's been explained why, and that we've kind of granted an extension as a result of that. So it's really just to note that if the monitoring is from a past date, it must have been submitted at the point of your application, and we can't fund any organisations with an overdue monitoring report, but we can fund an organisation if you have a future monitoring due on another LCF programme, so that wouldn't affect your application at all. In terms of registration, we do ask that if your income for charitable purposes is over £500,000 a year at the time of application, that you must have registered your organisation. So that could be submitting an application to register with the Charity Commission or other relevant regulators, so Companies House, for example, as well. So if the grant is going to take you over £500,000 a year in terms of your income, yes, we would also look that you look to register in terms of setting up your charity or you're registering with the appropriate structure. Move on. What's not eligible? So, sorry, this is a slight bit of a list of things that we're not able to fund currently, but I'll talk you through them. So companies limited by shares, which includes CICs limited by shares. Statutory organisations such as local authorities, we're not able to fund as well. NHS bodies and cooperative societies. The grant can't be used for promoting religious or political views, it can't be for profit or personal benefit, and it can't be for spending that's already happened, so any retrospective funding. It can only be for funding that happens from the point of the grant award. Also, activities that exclude people on the basis of religion, sexual orientation, gender or ethnicity, unless the issue is group specific. So that may well be the case for this fund. If you are working exclusively with women, for example, then that's would count as a group specific reason. How to apply. So if you haven't sort of gone through the process with LCF before, all of the information's on our website. So you would go to the apply section, which is highlighted at the top, and that will take you through to the list of open funds that we've got at the moment. And this fund is listed as an open fund. So you would click on through to the fund page. On the fund page, you'll see on the right-hand side links to the application form and the programme guidelines. So all of the information that you should need is within those guidelines, and really encourage you to really look through them in detail to make sure you are eligible before you apply, just to save yourself time if you're not. Any questions, obviously, please do ask them once we finish the presentation. We can answer what we can, but also do feel free to get in touch with LCF. The contact details are in the programme guidelines as well, and we're really happy to answer any queries you have as you go through looking at them. In terms of supporting documents, I did just want to sort of highlight what we've got. We're requesting that you upload with your application. So the first is the organisation's governing document. As I've mentioned, that's an essential requirement that we would be looking in. Please make sure that it's signed as well. An up-to-date safeguarding policy, which must have been reviewed within the last 2 years. So again, just double check that it's been signed and dated within the last 2 years. Your annual accounts for the last completed financial year. These can be management accounts if your accounts aren't quite signed off yet for this financial year. So you could submit your management accounts. We can also accept draft accounts if needed, and just make sure they've been signed off by your CEO or a trustee. And just a sort of a note that because we are expecting a potentially high volume of applications for this fund, and we're trying to sort of make sure we're processing everything as quickly as we can. If there's a missing document out of those 3 essential documents, unfortunately, we won't be able to take your application further. So we haven't built in time to be following up and chasing up any missing documents. So any problems uploading, please do make sure you email us and get in touch. And yes, make sure that that's done before you submit your application. The contact details is applications@londoncf.org.uk. So that's one that my colleague Amari will be monitoring as well. So any queries, please don't hesitate to contact through that email address. Just a bit of a walk through the funding process of the kind of steps that we will be taking. So step 1 really is for you to really have a really good look through the guidelines, check that you feel you're eligible, and also look at and really think about how you meet the fund priorities as well. Once you decide that it's a fund you would like to apply for, you enter your email address into the form, and you'll then get a notification email to say that your application has been started. If an email doesn't come through sort of within the first few minutes, please do check your junk mail, and if not, then please do contact LCF as well. The application form then is live. It can be completed in stages, so you don't have to complete it all in one go. You can save it as you go along. We do recommend that you sometimes keep your any information that you're editing on a Word document as well, just in case of any online sort of browser crashes or anything like that, just in case. Once the application deadline closes, which is midday on the 4th of April, you'll no longer be able to access any live application that you've got if you haven't submitted it by that date. LCF then will check through all the applications. We'll check the eligibility, first of all, making sure that the 3 documents we've gone through are uploaded, and make sure that you meet the core eligibility criteria that we've spoken through as well. Once we've established eligible organisations, we then go into the shortlisting phase, and that looks a bit more in terms of the priorities of the programme that Leslie's spoken through, and from that we agree a shortlist, and those organisations, the organisations that are then assessed in more detail. So that goes into a bit more of a thorough due diligence check, looking at the detail of what you're proposing and how well it meets the fund and the criteria. We then have decision-making panels, which take place the first 2 weeks in May. And those panels will be essentially looking to approve the recommendations made by the assessments. We're aiming that all grant decisions will be made the week commencing the 15th of May. So really looking to work as quickly as possible to make sure we get the outcome of applications out as soon as we can. And then as soon as you've got your grant offer letter, that's when activities can begin, and it will be 6 months from the date of your grant offer. Reporting requirements. So acknowledging that this is really an emergency response fund, the grants are flexible in terms of what you spend on them. So within your application, we are asking you to give an outline of the budget lines that you think you would break down to be able to deliver the project that you're proposing. But we completely understand that things change at a moment's notice, and want to give you the flexibility and the trust to be able to respond to needs as and when they're arising during the course of your grant. So if you do need to change some of the budget lines that you had put forward, that's absolutely fine, as long as it's focusing on your work towards supporting victim survivors of VAWG to meet a response to the cost of living crisis. Then it's over to you to make the changes that are needed to respond best to that. For any changes towards any core costs that you had put into your application, we do ask you to contact LCF, and we will just review your proposal and aim to approve it as soon as we can, so that you can reallocate any core costs if needed. But certainly for direct projects, immediate costs to the women and girls that you're working with, then absolutely make the changes as needed. Just check that they meet the overall aims of the fund. The grant period is 6 months, so from the date of the offer letter, and really that short time period is just a reflection that we are seeing this particular fund as an emergency response fund for immediate needs that are occurring within the next 6 months. Successful applicants will be required then to report back to LCF on the impact of the funding at the end of the grant period. So after 6 months, we will submit an online form for you to complete, just to tell us about the impact that the funding has had, what you've been able to deliver, any changes, any challenges. We are trying to keep reporting requirements to a minimum for this fund, but we do really want to make sure that we are understanding the impact and the need that's emerging, so that we can really learn from that and make sure that that's fed into future funding decisions as well. Okay, just a few points on essentially what we're looking for as a sort of a good funding application. Really being clear, fit for purpose for the programme. So again, that's really using the programme guidelines document as your key document to really be checking at how your work clearly fits the aims of this particular fund. That your organisation has a really clear aims and really clear presence within the community that you support, and a good understanding of and connection to that community. We ask that your plans are realistic and that you have the expertise in place to deliver those plans. So when we say realistic plans, it's not expecting for you to have huge numbers of beneficiaries. It's being that you've really thought through and you're using all of your expertise and experience that you have already to know what you need to deliver and what's realistic to deliver, and that you have the expertise in place to be able to do that. And then also that the timeline's achievable, so it is within 6 months, and that you've kind of thought through how you would mobilise that that support. It may be work that you're already doing, and it's a continuation to build on that. If it's something new, just again, that the timeline's reasonable and achievable. And then also we do ask a question over the need, so that you've got a kind of a good understanding and an explanation of how the needs of the people that you support is evidenced through your application as well. Just a quick pointer on our website as well, in terms of, we have a resources page which may be useful for you to check as well. It has a few other kind of pointers around applications, and also other things. There's the safeguarding section as well, the safeguarding policies, so it might be worth having a look at that if you haven't. And then keeping up to date, we have a newsletter that goes out monthly that has lots of other opportunities for funding, both within LCF and other funds as well. So if you're not signed up, then we'd encourage you to have a look at signing up to that as well. That is all that we had to talk through in terms of the presentation. I'm going to move over now to the Q&A, and we'll go through. It looks like Amari's been doing an amazing job of answering those that she's been able to. Oh, and Leslie as well. That's brilliant. So we've got 3 open questions at the moment. The first one is from Debs. We provide trauma-informed, in-depth support to disadvantaged parents, 95% women. Many, but not all, impacted by VAWG. So is it worth us applying if we don't just support those impacted by VAWG? Let me just check that. Debs, you absolutely meet the criteria of the fund. I think in terms of the priority grouping, many but not all impacted by VAWG. I suppose it's looking at whether you would view yourself as a specialist VAWG provider. Leslie, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I think it's, I guess when we're looking at the criteria, and in particular the volume, there is the need to kind of evidence that this is specialist support for those who are impacted by VAWG, and we are saying that it's a cost of living fund specifically to be targeted at those who have been impacted by VAWG because of the disproportionate impact on them. So it's, I guess, if you put an application in, just being able to evidence, what you'd be using the fund for is specifically for that cohort of people that you're supporting, if that's what you're able to do.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Leslie. Message from Emma. Does the eligibility exclude faith-based VAWG charities that work with individuals of all faiths and none? No, it would not exclude. It would not exclude faith-based charities. So you would absolutely meet the criteria to apply. Howard, will you welcome applications from groups that are not? Oh, sorry, 1 second. Just lost my place. Sorry, will you welcome applications from groups that are not primarily VAWG focused, but engage in general mental wellbeing work, which contributes towards prevention and reducing VAWG, e.g. enabling resilience building, confidence, learning strategies to keep safe? So because, to check I've understood your question, because this fund is an emergency response funding, my response would be that contributing towards prevention is not quite the right fit for this fund. Would you agree, Leslie?
Yeah, absolutely, because we're focusing on the impact of the cost of living as opposed to the prevention. So I can completely see why you'd be thinking that this, it's relevant, but us needing to set parameters, we are looking at actually, this is about funding somebody who has been directly impacted by the cost of living, so it's after prevention.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. What if you have a pending application to the London Community Foundation and you want to ask for more money and expand the project funding already applied for? That would be fine in principle, as long as you are not reliant on the funds that you've applied for to be able to deliver this sort of additional element of the project, I think would be my steer. I suppose we would want to look that it wouldn't be sort of exclusively a requirement that if you didn't get the funding, could you still deliver this element of the project, essentially? I think we would want to look at how you would do that, but potentially there would be no reason why you couldn't, but just reassurance on any contingencies if it turned out that you weren't successful with the pending application. Next question, can we ask for computers which need updating who work with women on VAWG? So I think if that's in relation to computers for your organisation, I think that's how I read that question. Then that could count as a core cost, I think, Leslie, couldn't it? That would be an eligible cost.
Yeah, and there is also eligibility around if you've got equipment that you're using with survivors and victims of VAWG as well. I would think that this would come under that as well, because it's about them being able to access the service.
Yeah. Okay. Next question, can we use the funding to improve or expand the reach of a currently existing project? Yes, if you have work in place that is going on, and that this would add to it, and you can evidence sort of how you're using your reach to be able to do that. Leslie, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's anything additional. Yep.
Perfect. Next question. We're a community centre led by VAMA people. Are you going to consider our application? Absolutely. If you meet the criteria, the eligibility criteria, I think if you are, as a community centre, we would really need to look at kind of how your VAWG your specifically work supporting victim survivors of VAWG was a core part of your work, and would need to see kind of your experience in delivering that type of work. If that was a core part of it, then you would be eligible. You may not fall into the priority group, but you would be eligible to apply. But yeah, maybe need a little bit more information over the background of your actual service delivery and the work you do with women and girls. Next question is from Sabrina. I was excited to hear about this. I empower refugees, asylum seekers and migrants with no recourse to public funds, live a life they love, careers, wellbeing coaches, access to computers, phones and travel costs for employment and education. However, my social enterprise has been registered for 1 year, first set of accounts not due until October 2023. Does this mean I cannot apply? So you can still apply. I'm conscious we haven't actually given guidance, particularly for new organisations within this, within the guidelines. You would still be eligible to apply. I think we would need to really understand, the work that's been going on already, and we would ask for an income and expenditure and sort of management accounts for this first year, accepting that you wouldn't have accounts beyond this first year. So hopefully that answers your question, but do get in touch if you want a bit more information over exactly what we would want you to submit. That looks like all of the live questions have been answered. Are there just a moment for any other final questions, if anybody has any? Is a copy of the slides available for us to look through when applying? Yes, I mean, essentially all of the information here really has been taken from the fund guidelines, but we can put a copy of the slides up on the fund page. We'll also put a recording of this webinar up. And what we're looking to do as well is to create an FAQ document. So all of the questions that have been asked today, we will we'll be turning into an FAQ document, and we'll add to that as we go. So that's, yes. Great. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, please do reach out to Elsie if anything else comes to you sort of after this webinar. The best email address is outlined on our fund page, but applications@londoncf.org.uk, and wish you all the best with your application. So thank you very much.
Thank you.